What's going on? Everybody, welcome back to the channel, and if you are a Dallas Cowboys fan, you are going to want to sit down for this one because we have some major news coming out of Dallas, and it involves the pass rush, and it involves two of the most dominant edge rushers that could potentially hit the open market. And we are talking about none other than Khalil Mack and Trey Hendrickson. Now look, we all know what happened last season with the Dallas Cowboys. And we all know that the defense took a significant step back in terms of generating pressure on the quarterback. And that is something that Jerry Jones and the front office simply cannot afford to ignore heading into the next chapter of this franchise. So today, we are going to break down everything you need to know about why the Cowboys are expected to aggressively target free agent edge rushers, what Khalil Mack and Trey Hendrickson would bring to this defense, and which one of these guys makes the most sense for Dallas going forward. So make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and let's get right into it. Now, let me set the stage here for a second, because I think it's really important to understand why the Cowboys are in this position in the first place. And it all comes down to one simple reality: the Dallas Cowboys have struggled to consistently get after the quarterback. And when you look at the elite teams in the NFL, the teams that are competing for Super Bowls year in and year out, they all have one thing in common, and that is a dominant pass rush. You look at the San Francisco 49ers, you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, you look at what the Detroit Lions have built, and every single one of those teams invests heavily in getting after the quarterback. Because at the end of the day, if you cannot pressure the quarterback, you are not going to win football games in January and February. And the Cowboys have learned that lesson the hard way over the past several seasons. Now, yes, Micah Parsons is an absolute game wrecker, and he is one of the most talented defensive players in the entire NFL. But here's the thing: you cannot ask Micah Parsons to do everything by himself. And that has been the problem in Dallas for a while now, because when you only have one elite pass rusher, opposing offenses can game plan around that one guy. They can chip him, they can double team him, they can roll protection his way, and suddenly your pass rush disappears. And that is exactly what has happened to the Cowboys in some of their biggest games. So, what is the solution? Well, the solution is pretty straightforward. You go out and you get another elite edge rusher to pair with Micah Parsons, and you create a situation where offensive lines have to pick their poison. Do you double team Parsons and let the other guy go one-on-one? Or do you try to handle both of them and risk getting your quarterback destroyed? And that is exactly what the Cowboys are looking to do this offseason. And the two names that keep coming up over and over again in reports and conversations around the league are Khalil Mack and Trey Hendrickson. And honestly, both of these guys would be incredible additions to this defense. So let's talk about each one of them individually and break down what they would bring to the table. Let's start with Khalil Mack, because this is a name that every football fan in America knows and respects. And for good reason. Khalil Mack has been one of the most dominant defensive players of his generation. And even though he is getting older and some people might question whether he still has it left in the tank, let me tell you something: this man can still play football at an extremely high level. And the tape does not lie. When you turn on the film and you watch Khalil Mack rush the passer, you see a guy who still has an elite first step, who still has incredible hand technique, who still has the power to bull rush offensive tackles into the quarterback's lap, and who still has the football IQ to set up his moves and win consistently off the edge. Now, yes, he is not the same player he was when he won Defensive Player of the Year with the Oakland Raiders back in 2016, but guess what? He doesn't need to be, because in Dallas, he would not be asked to be the #1 pass rusher. He would be asked to be the complement to Micah Parsons, and that is a role that he could absolutely thrive in. Think about it for a second. If you are an offensive coordinator and you are game planning for the Dallas Cowboys, and you see Khalil Mack lined up on one side and Micah Parsons lined up on the other side, that is an absolute nightmare scenario. Because now you have two guys who can win one-on-one against any offensive tackle in the league, and you cannot double team both of them at the same time, something has to give. And when something gives, that means your quarterback is going to be on his back, and that is exactly the kind of pressure that the Cowboys need to be generating if they want to compete for a championship. And the beautiful thing about Khalil Mack is that he brings more than just pass rushing ability to the table. He is also an elite run defender. He sets the edge better than almost any defensive end in the league. He is disciplined, he doesn't take plays off, and he brings a championship mentality and a veteran presence to the locker room that would be invaluable for a young Dallas Cowboys defense. Now let me talk about the other option, and that is Trey Hendrickson. Because if you have been sleeping on Trey Hendrickson, you need to wake up right now, because this man has been absolutely dominant over the past few seasons. And he is arguably one of the most underrated pass rushers in the entire NFL. And I know some people might push back on that and say, well, Hendrickson played in Cincinnati, and he had a great defensive line around him, and the scheme helped him and all of that. But let me tell you something, when you are putting up double-digit sacks year after year after year, that is not a product of scheme. That is a product of being a really, really good football player. And Trey Hendrickson is exactly that. He is a relentless pass rusher who never stops working, who has an incredible motor, who plays with maximum effort on every single snap, and who has developed his pass rush moves to the point where he is one of the most technically sound edge rushers in the league. And here is the thing that I think makes Trey Hendrickson potentially even more attractive than Khalil Mack for the Dallas Cowboys, and that is his age, because Hendrickson is younger than Mack. And when you are investing significant money in a free agent pass rusher, you want to make sure that you are getting multiple years of elite production out of that investment. And with Hendrickson, you have a guy who is still in the prime of his career, who is still getting better, who is still ascending as a player, and who could give you 4 or 5 years of dominant pass rush production. And that is incredibly valuable when you are trying to build a championship caliber defense. Now, let me talk about the fit, because I think both of these guys would fit beautifully in the Dallas Cowboys defense, but for slightly different reasons, and it all comes down to what Dan Quinn's defense is looking for, and what kind of pass rusher complements Micah Parsons the best. And I think the answer to that question depends on what you value more. Do you value the veteran presence and the proven track record of a future Hall of Famer in Khalil Mack? Or do you value the youth and the upside and the potential for long-term dominance of Trey Hendrickson? And honestly, you cannot go wrong with either option, because both of these guys are elite pass rushers who would immediately make this defense better. But let me give you my personal take on this situation, and I think a lot of you are going to agree with me on this one. I think if the Dallas Cowboys can get Trey Hendrickson at a reasonable price, he should be the #1 target because of the combination of his age, his production, and his ability to be a long-term solution at the edge rusher position opposite Micah Parsons. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Khalil Mack, and I think he would be amazing in Dallas, but when you are investing in a free agent, you have to think about the long term. And Hendrickson gives you more runway than Mack does at this point in their respective careers. Now let's talk about the financial aspect of this, because this is where it gets really interesting, and this is where Jerry Jones and the Dallas Cowboys front office are going to have to make some tough decisions, because neither one of these guys is going to come cheap. And if you want to bring in an elite edge rusher, you are going to have to pay elite edge rusher money. And that means you might have to make some sacrifices in other areas of the roster. And that is a calculation that every front office has to make. But I would argue that investing in the pass rush is one of the smartest things you can do in today's NFL, because the pass rush affects everything. It affects the secondary, because when you are getting pressure on the quarterback, your corners and safeties don't have to cover for as long. It affects the run defense, because elite edge rushers also tend to be good run defenders, and it affects the overall mentality of your defense, because when you have guys who can get after The quarterback, your entire defense plays with more confidence and more aggression. And let me tell you something about Jerry Jones that I think a lot of people forget. And that is that when Jerry Jones wants to make a splash, he makes a splash. And we have seen it time and time again throughout his ownership of the Dallas Cowboys. When Jerry identifies a player that he believes can put this team over the top, he is willing to open up the checkbook and make it happen. And I think this offseason could be one of those moments where Jerry decides that enough is enough, and that it is time to invest in the pass rush and give this defense the weapons it needs to compete with the best teams in the NFC. Now, I also want to talk about what some of the league insiders are saying about this situation, because it's not just speculation and rumor. There are legitimate reports coming out that the Dallas Cowboys are expected to be aggressive in pursuing edge rush help this offseason, and multiple sources have indicated that both Khalil Mack and Trey Hendrickson are on the Cowboys' radar, and that the front office has been doing their homework on both players and evaluating how they would fit into the defense and what it would take to get a deal done. And that tells me that this is not just wishful thinking from Cowboys fans. This is something that the organization is seriously considering and potentially planning to execute. And let me paint this picture for you, because I want you to really understand how terrifying this defense could be. If they add one of these guys, imagine a defensive front that has Micah Parsons rushing off one edge and either Khalil Mack or Trey Hendrickson rushing off the other edge. And then you have the rest of the defensive line in the middle, creating push up the gut, and you have a secondary behind them that only has to cover for 2 or 3 seconds because the quarterback is already under duress. That is a recipe for a top 5 defense in the NFL, and that is a recipe for a team that can compete for a Super Bowl, because defense wins championships, and we have seen that proven time and time again in the history of this league. Now, I know some of you in the comments are going to say, well, what about the draft? Can't the Cowboys just draft an edge rusher and develop him? And yes, that is absolutely an option, and the Cowboys should still be looking at edge rushers in the draft, regardless of what they do in free agency. But here is the reality of the situation. The Cowboys need help. Now they need a pass rusher who can come in and make an immediate impact from day one. And that is something that a rookie cannot always guarantee, but a proven veteran like Khalil Mack or Trey Hendrickson can. And that is why free agency is so important for the Cowboys this offseason, because they cannot afford to wait 2 or 3 years for a draft pick to develop into an elite pass rusher. They need that production right now. And let me also address the elephant in the room, which is the question of whether or not DeMarcus Lawrence is going to be back with the Cowboys, because that is a factor that plays into all of this. And if Lawrence is not back, or if he is back in a reduced role, then the need for an edge rusher becomes even more urgent and even more critical. And that is why the Cowboys are doing their due diligence on both Mack and Hendrickson, because they want to be prepared for any scenario, and they want to make sure that no matter what happens with the rest of their roster, they have a plan in place to address the pass rush. So, let me break this down one more time and give you my final thoughts on this situation, because I think this is one of the most important decisions the Dallas Cowboys are going to make this offseason, and it could determine whether this team takes a step forward or takes a step back. And here is what I think. I think the Cowboys should prioritize Trey Hendrickson as their #1 target because of his age, his production, and his fit in this defense. But if Hendrickson is not available, or if the price gets too high, then Khalil Mack is an absolutely phenomenal backup option, who would also make this defense significantly better. And either way, the Cowboys need to come out of this offseason with a legitimate pass rusher to pair with Micah Parsons, because if they don't, they are going to be in the same position they have been in for the past few years, which is a team that has talent, but cannot get over the hump when it matters most. And I want to hear from you guys in the comments section below. Who do you want the Dallas Cowboys to sign? Do you want Khalil Mack with his Hall of Fame pedigree and his veteran leadership? Or do you want Trey Hendrickson with his youth and his ascending production? Let me know in the comments. because I am genuinely curious to see what Cowboys Nation thinks about this situation. And I know there are going to be passionate opinions on both sides, and that is what makes this such a fun conversation to have. Now, before I wrap this up, I also want to mention that the Cowboys are not the only team that is going to be interested in these players, and that is something that cannot be overlooked, because when elite edge rushers hit the open market, there is always going to be a bidding war, and the Cowboys are going to have to compete with other teams that are also desperate for pass rush help, and that means Jerry Jones might have to be willing to overpay a little bit to get his guy, and that is a decision that he is going to have to make. And I think if he is serious about winning a championship, he will make that investment, because you cannot put a price tag on a dominant pass rush. And let me leave you with this thought, because I think it really encapsulates everything we have been talking about today. The Dallas Cowboys have not won a Super Bowl since 1995. And while there are many reasons for that, one of the biggest reasons is that they have not consistently had an elite pass rush that can take over games in the playoffs. And this offseason represents an opportunity to change that narrative and to build a defense that is capable of carrying this team deep into January and February. And if Jerry Jones is willing to make the investment, and if the front office makes the right decision on which edge rusher to target, then the Dallas Cowboys could be looking at one of the most dominant defensive fronts in the NFL next season. And that is something that every Cowboys fan should be excited about. So that is going to do it for today's video. I really hope you guys enjoyed this breakdown and this analysis of the Cowboys' potential pursuit of Khalil Mack and Trey Hendrickson. Make sure you hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and make sure you hit that notification bell so you never miss a video, because we are going to be covering all the latest Cowboys news and rumors throughout the entire offseason, and you are not going to want to miss any of it. I appreciate each and every one of you for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.